As much as I gave this show too much slack for the problems that I've addressed in the past and not being into it completely, I have to admit, when I was binge watching this show, I was so into this episode to the point that I actually enjoy every bit of it. Which is why I'm reviewing this for Halloween Mania, since I've already talked about the Halloween episode of Craig of the Creek 2 years ago. In this episode, Craig sneaked into the living room while Bernard and his friends are watching a scary movie, which caused a reaction from Craig, getting the attention from Bernard and the others, and Bernard told Craig to leave while also telling him that everything that happens in the movie is all fake and not real, which he boasts about it, by the way. Back at the creek, Craig, while Kelsey is playing golf, encounters the monster that was seen in the movie. So they rush back to Craig's house, and the monster followed them on their way, which leads to Craig, his friends, Bernard and his friends, into a pickle where they need to defeat the monster, but at the same time, Bernard still doesn't believe in monsters up until he gets scared to death, just like Craig. Considering that most teenagers mostly act mature, and sometimes I usually take that criticism a little too literally and mostly personally when it comes to characters acting slightly immature, this really feels like the perfect way to act this way in order to understand of what's real and what's not real, and in Bernard's point of view, this is real. But in actuality, it isn't. In all honesty, judging the fact that maybe the imagination from the characters is mainly how the Max moves mainly, but in my point of view, considering that Max are a lot more designable when it comes to highly advanced costumes, maybe there's a reason onto why the Max is moving with so many different accessories that it has. I'm gonna be really honest with you, I'm mostly with Bernard when it comes to movies not being real and it's all fiction, but at the same time, I'm also not with Bernard when it comes to being afraid that all this in movies are real. Like, at Craig's age, it actually makes sense, but the fact that Bernard is acting just as terrified as Craig is really saying something, considering that no matter how mature Bernard is, at times, I have to admit, he has flaws, and everyone has flaws, and for me personally, if he ever watched a movie at Craig's age that actually made him scared, he either kept it to himself, or just wants to be mature in front of so many people to prove to everyone that he is better than everyone else, even though that in different attributes and talents, they're better than him. If I'm gonna be real with you, the episode focusing on Craig's friends and Bernard's friends working together while staying out of the monster's wrath is something that I actually enjoyed upon watching this episode during my binge watch of Craig of the Creek. Having the young characters teaming up with the old characters isn't something you see every day, but for me personally, in scenarios involving horror movie aspects, especially since that a monster is about to kill these characters from their own perspectives, not the monster, I actually knew that this was going to happen sometimes involving cartoon scenarios. Because let me tell you, you will probably do the same thing as any of the other characters in this episode for the sake of surviving no matter what, while also saving the ones that don't deserve to be captured or getting eaten or worse. Like, even though that we're all adults and we all know all of this is fake, keep in mind we were probably in everyone else's shoes, especially Bernard's when it comes to relatability, even though that Bernard is completely different in comparison to the other characters up until he reveals that he is afraid just as much as Craig. You know, when I watched one of the clips in one of the final episodes of season 4 involving Bernard telling Craig off on him might moving into the creek, since that the creek is basically his life apparently, it kind of sums up a lot that Bernard is just trying a lot more in order to be mature, but at the same time, you can also not be too mature when it comes to you pretending that you know something is fake and act like that you're braver than anyone else, only to expose yourself in front of the ones that are just as afraid as you are. But to tell you the truth, judging of how real the costume is, it kind of shows that Bernard is just willing to make sure that he doesn't get himself into too much danger, while Alexis and Craig are willing to set up a trap in order to stop the monster, instead of Craig and Bernard working together. If it really feels like the people who made this episode were intending to have Bernard and Craig working together in order to have Bernard face his fears, it doesn't change the fact that the others wouldn't even face their fears, considering that they're more invested in the movies in comparison to him. If I'm gonna be real with you, if he boasts about it in front of everyone, it will probably make him way more unlikable in comparison to how he acted way earlier in the episode. But it's also worth mentioning that he also punched the monster out of fear, which causes the mask to be flew off, which is revealed to be Elder David, who was in the costume the entire time. This isn't really a Scooby-Doo moment, considering that the main characters didn't pull the mask out of him, so in all honesty, due to Bernard's fear of punching the monster, this is not really a Scooby-Doo moment. It's mainly out of luck moments that caught the character's attention. The reason of why David was in a Swamp Monster costume is because he and his friends were doing a reboot of the Swamp Monster movie that Bernard and his friends were watching, mainly the main movie. And Craig came across a thumb drive, which is all the progress of making that reboot, which is why David came to Craig's house in order to get it from him. And considering that one of Bernard's friends didn't get captured or getting eaten by the monster, it's really saying something. Like, this character alone has a lot of bravery in comparison to Bernard, which, even though I neglected to mention, it doesn't change the fact that sometimes when you make characters like this, it's done really brilliantly and really more intelligently. And the episode ends with David showing them the rough cut of the reboot, which also ends with Bernard telling Craig if there's a real monster or another monster that ends up attacking him, he'll punch him in the face, which is a really smart move and a really brave thing for a brother to do, but at the same time, you never know if the monster is really gonna be that vulnerable in comparison to David. Let's be real, the less we think about that, the better. I really enjoyed this episode, to the point that it made me understand the praise of what people are giving towards this show, and even though I do not give praise to all the qualities, I have to understand that the more I think about these aspects, the more I learn upon revisiting these episodes from time to time. Even when I'm behind of getting back on track of this show, at least I managed to binge watch it and remember the moments that made me enjoy the show a little bit more. I'm giving this episode an 8.25 out of 10.